All right, Algebra 1. Lesson 82 is about evaluating functions and domain and range. We have evaluated functions before. This is kind of a review for us. When something says like f of x and then it gives you a value for x, you just plug it in to the x spot, right? And so you don't need this part. And so we just bring down the equation and start plugging in 5 wherever x is at, and then finish out the equation like normal order of operations. And so that first one, you would have ended up with 20. The next one, same thing. We're going to plug stuff in, and we don't have a number this time. We have a variable with an exponent, but we're still going to plug that in. And so once we plugged it in, with parentheses, of course, let's go through and solve that. And remember, when you have an exponent on the outside of parentheses, like you were multiplying those exponents. So you should have a to the 4th there. Then go through, and technically there's 1 outside of there, so we got a squared plus 1. There are no like terms here. A to the 4th, and then this one's a to the 2nd, and then plus 1. And so that would be your answer on that one. All right, let's go to example 3. Same thing, we're plugging this in, except now we actually have an equation, so we've got a little bit more work to do. But we're going to get rid of that. That's not important. And then we're going to add in the value of x, and then plus 1. And then here, if we look at this, because it's squared, like you are basically going to be doing FOIL here. And so we multiply our first, which is x squared, and then our outer, and then the inner, and then the last terms, plus 1. All right, and then go through and add any like terms that you have. So x squared we're going to leave, and then we have 4x when we add our two x's together. And then that last one, 4 plus 1, is 5. And there's nothing more that you can do with that one. And so that would be your answer for that one. All right, so now we're going to go into talking about domains and range. Domain is basically your x-axis, the values that you use on your x-axis, and then the range is your y-axis and the values that you use there when you're graphing. Another way to look at it is like domain is input and then range is output. So whatever you put in to a value or a function, whatever comes back out of it is going to be your range, your output. And a lot of times domains are going to be all real numbers because, I mean, any real number that you put in there, like for instance in this situation right here, I mean, f of x. X could be any real number, you know, that there's not a value to be put in there. And then also with this one, because there's an x with this 2, which is your output, whatever you put in here, I mean, let's, for example, if you put in 2, all right, well, this could be 4 once you put in 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. If you had 3 here, well, this could be 6. If you had 5 here, it could be 10. And so there is a multitude of real numbers that it could be. And so for this one right here, because it's asking you like what the domain is, it says find the domain and find the range. Well, the domain is going to be all real numbers, because it could be any real number that you plug in there. And then for the range, because depending on what you put right here, I mean, it could be a multitude of things as well. And so for this one, it could be all real numbers as well, because, I mean, there's just a ton of things that it could turn out to be. All right, now let's go on to another example. All right, so this one says f of x is 3. Okay, so on this side, that's our domain side, it does not give us a value for x. So again, the domain can be anything that we want to put in there. It does not matter as long as it was a real number. And so, which means it's everything, right? Any number is going to be a real number. All numbers are real numbers, if you remember back from that lesson. And so we could put any value we want to with x. But on this side, there's no x, and so it says that it equals 3. So it tells us that the range is 3 on this one. And so that's all we're going to put is range is 3 because there's no variable over there and it gives us exactly what it's supposed to be. All right, so example 6, I'm going to put the book under here and let's look at this graph. All right, so it says here, it says if the graph of the function is as shown, determine what the domain and the range would be. Okay, so the domain is going to be, like, again, it's the x-axis, and so it's going to be whatever the set of numbers is between any points that are on the x, okay? And so this one's not going to be all reals because if you look, there's a point here, there's a point at the origin, and then there's a point here. Like this doesn't go on and on these lines. They actually give us a stopping point. So for our domain on this one, we're going to look, and we're going to say, okay, all right, so this one, if we're looking on the x-axis, the first point that we hit is -2, okay? So that's why they have -2 on this side. Then we look, and we are still going on the x-axis because we were at this point, and we keep going down, and then the next one stops up here, okay? And so that is at a +3. So the domain, it could be any real number, but the real number has to be between -2 and 3, a +3. And because this one was open, we know it's not equal to. It's got to be greater than. And then this one right here could actually be 3. And so that's why we write this out. So for the domain, it's going to be any real number, or x is the value of any real number between -2 and 3. Now, let's look at our y coordinates. It can be any real number between, all right, and so as we're going up, the y, all right, so we're here first. We hit this point, which is the origin, okay, so it's 0. And then we keep going up, and then the next, they're the highest point, okay, so this one's at 3, but we go up one more, and this one is at 4. And so the range is going to be any real number between 0 and +4 because that's the width going this way of this shape. So it's the lowest and the highest point of the y, and then the lowest and highest point to the x is going to be your domain. That's where these numbers come from. All right, so let's go on to example 7. Okay, so something that you need to remember, just a few little rules. One thing is you can never have a negative in the house, okay? And so when we're talking about functions here, okay, so on the domain side, we could put any number we wanted to in for x on this one, okay? So the domain is all reals, but the x on this side, on the y side, the range side, can't be all reals. Because, okay, so let's say we put 0 in for x, okay? 5 minus 0 is 5, right? 5's okay to be in the house, all right? If we put 1 in, 5 minus 1 is 4, still okay in the house. If we put 2 in, 5 minus 2 is 3, still okay. 4, 5 minus 4 would have been 1, it's still okay. And then 5 minus 5 is 0, and 0 would have been fine. But if we put 6 in here, 5 minus 6 is -1. You can never have a negative in the house on this one. So for a range on this one, you can say x has to be less than or equal to 5. Because anything greater than 5 is going to give you a negative number, and you cannot have that. So that's what the range would be on this one. All right, example 8, on this side, the domain side, it's all reals. You can put any number you wanted to in that spot. And 9 times out of 10, domain is going to be all reals anyway. But for the range, the only thing that, I guess a rule about the denominator is you can never have a 0 in the denominator spot. If you put that in a calculator, it'll say error because you can't have it. And so as far as the range on that one, it can be anything but 0. So x cannot equal 0 is what you would put for the range on that one. Anything else would be fine in that spot, just not a 0. So those are just 2 rules that you got to remember and know about functions. No negatives in the house, no zeros in the denominator spot. Other than that, everything else is pretty much fair game. Just make sure that you do the examples. Example A through E in the practice problems. And write any notes you have and any questions. Just get with me and I can answer those for you. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.